The rise of Pablo Escobar from petty criminal to drug lord. Pablo Escobar, man, that's a name that still gives people chills. This dude wasn't just some random criminal, he was the kingpin of all kingpins. The guy who made the Colombian drug trade what it is today. But let's rewind a bit. Escobar didn't start out as the big bad wolf. Nah, he began as a small-time crook in Medellin, Colombia. We're talking petty theft, small-scale smuggling, that kind of stuff. But this guy, he had ambition. He saw an opportunity in the cocaine trade, and boy, did he grab it. By the 1970s, Escobar was climbing the ladder of the drug world. Fast. He wasn't just selling coke, he was revolutionizing the whole game. This dude set up labs in the jungle, organized distribution networks, and even bought his own planes to transport the stuff. It was like he was running a Fortune 500 company, but instead of selling computers or cars, he was pushing powder, and business was booming. At his peak, Escobar's Medellin cartel was supplying 80% of the world's cocaine. That's not a typo, folks. 80%. But Escobar wasn't content with just being rich. He wanted power, real power. So he did what any self-respecting drug lord would do. He went into politics, he started shaking hands with politicians, making deals, and trying to legitimize his power. Escobar's wealth was unimaginable. He had a luxurious estate, complete with exotic animals like hippos and giraffes. He even tried to win the hearts of the poor by building homes and soccer fields. But make no mistake, he maintained control through fear and violence. His infamous plata o plomo policy, silver or lead, meant you either took his bribe or faced his bullets. Eventually, his reign of terror couldn't last forever. Law enforcement closed in. In the end, Escobar was killed on a rooftop in Medellin, marking the end of an era. His legacy is a complex one, leaving a lasting impact on Colombia and the world. From petty criminal to drug lord, Pablo Escobar's story is a stark reminder of the power and peril of ambition. Alright, let's talk about the end game. The final chapter in the life of one of the most notorious drug lords in history. By the early 1990s, Escobar was feeling the heat. The walls were closing in and the pressure was mounting. The Colombian government, backed by US intelligence and resources, was closing in. They were determined to bring him down, no matter the cost. They'd formed a special police unit called the Search Block, whose sole purpose was to take down Escobar. This unit was relentless and highly motivated. These guys were no joke. They were trained by US Delta Force and had all the latest tech. Night vision goggles, advanced weaponry, you name it. They were ready for anything. It was like the A-Team, but real and out for blood. They had one mission: capture or kill Pablo Escobar. Imagine the A-Team, but with real stakes and a real target. These guys were determined to end Escobar's reign of terror.
Escobar knew he was in trouble. The paranoia was eating him alive. He couldn't walk the streets anymore, couldn't trust anyone. Paranoia was setting in. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, suspecting everyone around him. Friends, family, associates, no one was above suspicion. But here's the thing about Escobar. He was smart, really smart. He always had a plan, always a step ahead. His cunning and intellect were legendary. He managed to negotiate a deal with the Colombian government. A deal that would shock the world. He managed to negotiate a deal with the Colombian government. In exchange for turning himself in, he'd get to build his own prison. In exchange for turning himself in, he'd get to build his own prison. A place where he could live comfortably while serving his sentence. Yeah, you heard that right. His own freaking prison. They called it La Catedral. It was more like a luxury resort than a jail. They called it La Catedral. It was more like a luxury resort than a jail. Tennis courts, a bar, even a waterfall. Tennis courts, a bar, even a waterfall. Escobar was living large while technically being imprisoned. Escobar was living large while technically being imprisoned. But the government soon realized they'd been played. Escobar was still running his empire from behind bars.
But the government soon realized they'd been played. Escobar was still running his empire from behind bars. He was orchestrating deals, ordering hits, and managing his cartel as if nothing had changed. Escobar was still running his empire from behind bars. When they tried to move him to a real prison, he escaped. That's when the real manhunt began. When they tried to move him to a real prison, he escaped. That's when the real manhunt began. The Search Block, the DEA, even a vigilante group called Los Pepes. That's when the real manhunt began. Escobar was on the run and everyone was after him. The Search Block, the DEA, even a vigilante group called Los Pepes. Escobar was on the run and everyone was after him. The Search Block, the DEA, even a vigilante group called Los Pepes. These guys were former Escobar associates who turned on him. The Search Block, the DEA, even a vigilante group called Los Pepes. These guys were former Escobar associates who turned on him. It was a full-on war. These guys were former Escobar associates who turned on him. It was a full-on war. The final days of Pablo Escobar were marked by chaos, violence, and a desperate struggle for survival. It was a full-on war. The final days of Pablo Escobar were marked by chaos, violence, and a desperate struggle for survival. His empire was crumbling, and his enemies were closing in from all sides. So here we are, December 2nd, 1993. The search block has tracked Escobar to a house in Los Olivos, a quiet neighborhood in Medellin. They move in fast and hard, no warning, no negotiation. They know Escobar won't come quietly. As they storm the house, all hell breaks loose. Gunfire erupts. It's chaos. Escobar and his bodyguard are holed up inside, outgunned but determined to fight to the end. This is it, folks. The last stand of the Cocaine King.
Now, what happens next is still debated. The official story goes like this. Escobar and his bodyguard make a break for it. They scramble onto the roof, hoping to escape to a neighboring house. But they're spotted. The police open fire. Escobar takes bullets to the leg, torso, and head. He falls. The most wanted man in the world is down. When the smoke clears, Pablo Escobar is dead, shot through the head. The reign of terror is over.
But here's where it gets interesting. Some people say Escobar didn't die in a shootout. Section 4, a body on display. The aftermath of Escobar's death. So, Escobar's dead. What happens next? Well, it gets weird, folks. Really weird. The death of Pablo Escobar marked the end of an era, but it also sparked a series of bizarre events that no one could have predicted. The authorities wanted to make damn sure everyone knew Escobar was gone. They needed to send a message, loud and clear, that the reign of the drug lord was over. So they did something that's hard to imagine today. In a move that shocked the world, they decided to put his body on display. They put his body on display. Yes, you heard that right. They laid out the corpse of the world's most notorious drug lord for all to see. Yeah, you heard that right. It was a spectacle unlike any other. They laid out the corpse of the world's most notorious drug lord for all to see. It was like a twisted version of Lenin's tomb, but instead of a preserved body in a mausoleum, it was a fresh corpse on a police station floor. It was like a twisted version of Lenin's tomb, but instead of a preserved body in a mausoleum, it was a fresh corpse on a police station floor. The scene was both macabre and surreal, a stark reminder of the violent life and death of Escobar.
Picture this. Escobar's body, bloodied and bloated, sprawled out on the ground. His shirt is pulled up, revealing his bullet wounds. His shirt is pulled up, revealing his bullet wounds. His face is swollen, almost unrecognizable. His face is swollen, almost unrecognizable. Around him, police officers pose for photos. Around him, police officers pose for photos. They're grinning, giving thumbs up, like they've just bagged a prize deer on a hunting trip. It's surreal, it's grotesque, but it's real. They're grinning, giving thumbs up, like they've just bagged a prize deer on a hunting trip. It's surreal, it's grotesque, but it's real. These photos would soon be splashed across newspapers and TV screens around the world. These photos would soon be splashed across newspapers and TV screens around the world. The message was clear, the king is dead. The message was clear, the king is dead. But here's where it gets even weirder.
People started flocking to see the body. It was like a macabre pilgrimage. People started flocking to see the body. It was like a macabre pilgrimage. Crowds gathered, drawn by morbid curiosity, to witness the end of an era. It was like a macabre pilgrimage. The scene became a dark tourist attraction, a place where people came to see the final chapter of Escobar's bloody saga. The aftermath of his death was as chaotic and bizarre as his life had been. Alright, so, after the whole body on display fiasco, it was time to bury Escobar. You'd think this would be straightforward, right? Wrong. This is Pablo Escobar we're talking about. Nothing's ever simple. The funeral was set for December 3rd, 1993, just a day after his death. The location? Cementerio Jardín Montesacro in Medellin. But this wasn't going to be any ordinary burial. No, sir, this was going to be a circus.
Word got out about the funeral, and people started showing up. We're not talking a few dozen mourners. We're talking thousands. Some estimates say up to 25,000 people crammed into that cemetery. It was madness. You had Escobar's family and loyal supporters. You had curious onlookers. You had journalists from around the world. And you had the police, trying to keep order in a situation that was anything but orderly. The atmosphere was electric, a mix of grief, anger, and barely contained chaos.
As Escobar's coffin was carried to the grave, the crowd went wild. People were pushing and shoving, trying to get closer.
Now you'd think that once Escobar was 6 feet under, that would be the end of it, right? Wrong again. See, almost as soon as the dust settled from that crazy funeral, the whispers started. People were saying, hey, what if that wasn't really Escobar in that coffin? I mean, this was a guy who'd escaped from his own custom-built prison, who'd managed to evade the combined forces of the Colombian and US governments for months. Was it really so far-fetched to think he might have faked his own death?
These weren't just the ramblings of conspiracy theorists either. There were some legit questions, like, why was the burial so rushed? Why wasn't there an official autopsy? And what about those photos of the body? Some people said the face looked off, like it might have been altered. The Colombian government tried to brush it all off. They said, look, we know it was Escobar, case closed. But the rumors wouldn't die. They just kept growing and growing. Until finally, in 2006, the authorities decided they'd had enough. So what did they do? They dug him up. Yeah, you heard that right.
Alright, let's dive into the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. Because even after the exhumation and DNA testing, some folks just weren't buying it. They were like, nah man, Escobar's still out there. And you know what? Some of these theories are pretty wild, but hey, that's what makes them fun, right? So let's break them down.
First up, we've got the body double theory. This one says that Escobar had a look-alike who died in his place. The idea is that Escobar was too smart, too prepared to get caught off guard. He always had an escape plan. Then there's the government conspiracy theory. This one's a doozy. It says that Escobar made a deal with the Colombian government and the DEA. The deal? He'd fake his death and disappear, and in return, he'd give up his empire and leave Colombia alone. Some people point to the rushed burial and the initial lack of DNA testing as evidence. They say it was all too convenient. But here's the thing. If Escobar was alive, where would he go? How could the most recognizable criminal in the world just vanish?
Another theory,